Okay, we are currently live. I'm going to share the live in the group.
Hi,
Um,
everybody. If you can hear me out there, we are live. Also, says my wonderful, talented, most extraordinary sister of mine, Kimber Rodriguez.
yes, sorry about the delay. We are having some technical difficulties.
Beyond our control.
Yes, um, but I'm going to share this link so that way we can have our wonderful members join us. Okay, 1 second.
All right, so just 1 second while we do everything, and let me tell you more about what's going on in my life. Well, let's see. Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a Jedi Knight living on a planet. Well, technically, he wasn't a Jedi Knight just yet. He was just some young upstart, snotty nosed kid living on a desert planet, and living with his aunt and his uncle because he believed that his father had died during the great epic Clone Wars, and so as the story goes, that these two droids crash land on this planet, and he picks them up there and with the Jawas who've been kind of a little bit of shady business. They always been doing a little kind of shady business type thing. So, just kind of these two droids are actually runaways from a galactic battle that happened right above Tatooine, which is a desert planet, mind you. So, is everybody following me? Anything?
I thought this was the story of your life. You said what's going on in your life.
Maybe, I may have been that snot nosed kid living on the planet in the middle of uh, Tatooine.
Right.
Yeah,
Why am I not buying this?
well, it could happen.
Uh-huh.
Yes. There's a lazy Udo, another gold all of gold, and she's buying the stairway to feral children.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm having trouble with my camera now.
Yes,
Sorry for all the technical issues that we're having tonight.
yes.
It's nights. Um, it
Yep,
doesn't want to
the
let me on
stores
camera.
are all closed. With her squirrel, she can get what she came for.
Well, it may not let me be on camera tonight because it is not working,
Okay.
but
Yes, it's just me
um,
in the corner, in me in the spotlight, and I do actually see myself on YouTube. So we are on YouTube. We are probably on Twitter. We're on Facebook.
yes, I have shared the link in our group for YouTube so that people can watch us tonight. Due to our technical difficulties, that's the only place that we're currently available. But
It's
and
a
then
high religion.
now my camera is not wanting to work. Hi, Shelly. Glad you're here. Again, I apologize. My camera's not working, so it's not going to let me on. I will keep trying. But yes, what is really new with you this week? How is your father in law? I know everyone's concerned about him.
He's okay. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay. But doing better?
Doing better.
Yeah, we had some freak storms coming through, and so we were without power Friday for about 8 hours, and then Sunday it went out again, and we were out for quite a few hours. So that's the reason that we are posting tonight. But other than that, glad I have power again. It was getting kind of hot and humid here without power yesterday. And living with candles, it was like, how did people do it back in the days before the internet and all that good stuff?
Hmm.
So let's go ahead
Open up
and
discussion onto the wonderful world of feral children.
yes. Um, one sec.
And one sec. Do 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 do
Sorry, I
do
am.
do. Oh, just heard something.
I've been having massive headaches lately, and so I am didn't want to go upstairs today, so I am downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just letting Mercy know to put on his headphones so that way we don't have to listen to The Price is Right while we are doing the show today.
Woohoo! Yes, let's do The Price is Right.
Yes. So he's got his headphones on. He's waiting for his show to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why my camera still does not want to work. It says it's being used by um, another program, but there's no other program here, so I'm confused by
Well,
it.
maybe it's stuck on Zoom.
Maybe. I mean, I
So,
go ahead and start telling us about the feral
all
children,
right. So,
and I'm going to go out and try to come back in while you're
with
done.
talks of Mowgli, Tarzan, as well as the legends and lore of these such things, we decided we want to discuss a few cases of the type thing, which we would like to call feral children. Now, legend, according to Roman mythology, there were a set of twins by the name of Romulus and Remus, and no, not to be confused with the Star Trek world.
Yay!
According to accounts of children being abandoned or raised by animals are as ancient as Roman mythology. The first reported feral children were twins of a noble birth who were left to die in the wilderness around 750 BC. According to legend, a she wolf suckled and protected them. Then, as stories say, a shepherd found the brothers who grew up tending flocks. Eventually, Romulus killed Remus and founded the city of Rome. See, exciting as that is. Now, ex- philosophers and scientists have long speculated nurture versus nature of the origin of language and the power of love. Some saw feral children as the perfect subjects to study, free of the imprint or influence on humanity. Others experiment on baby humans and monkeys.
Mm.
Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, was determined to discover the language that God would have spoken to Adam and Eve. In 1211, he had orphaned infants rounded up and ordered nurses to suckle and bathe the children, but never speak to them. If the babies grew up in silence, he thought they would speak the original language, but all the infants died. His labor was in vain. A monk named Celandine Adam wrote in his medieval chronicles, "For children could not live without the clappings of the hands, and the gestures, and the gladness of countenance and blandishments," whatever blandishment means.
Yes. That kind of reminds me of the experiment they did in, I think it was Romania, in an orphanage, where they showered some children with love and then they ignored the other ones, just
Hmm.
giving them their what they needed. And the way that it proved that we as humans need um, communication, you know, we need for people to pay attention to us and nurture us and love us, not just give us our basic necessities in order to
Right.
thrive and grow. So that's kind of what that little experiment reminds me of. If you
Why
hear
does
anything in the
Shelley
back,
bid $1?
I am not sure, but if you hear anything in the background, Mercy's here with me, so you might hear him every once in a while pipe in with his comments on the story.
Hi.
He says hello. Anyway, getting back on topic, in the 15th century, King James IV of Scotland, excuse me, of Scotland wanted to find out whether language was learned or innate. So he sent two children to be raised, not remained, raised on a remote island by a mute woman. Some say they spoke Hebrew. Robert Lindsay wrote in his 1814 Chronicles of Scotland. He added that there was no proof that the boys ever did talk. Psychologist Harry Harlow studied infant monkeys and noticed that those raised without a mother were reclusive. They were socially defective and clung to cloth diapers. So in the 1950s, he started experimenting with the nature of nurturing. In one test, he put groups of baby monkeys in a room with two fake mothers. One was made of wire and gave out food. The other was made of terry cloth and had soft arms that it held out. Though the monkeys were hungry, they clung to the cloth, choosing comfort over nourishment. Actually, Mercy is. Oh, she bid $1 because Mercy's watching The Price is Right.
Okay.
Yeah, he actually can't get it to load, so he's just here listening in to us.
Mm.
Harlow also isolated monkeys in cages, but allowed them to watch other monkeys. Soon the monkeys who were alone started staring blankly, circling their cages and self mutilating. Oh, poor babies.
Yes.
He later isolated the monkeys entirely, some for as long as 15 years. Yeah, that's kind of mean. I mean, those poor
Mm-hmm.
monkeys, those poor babies. Um, Now, no monkey has died during isolation, he wrote in a 1965 study. When initially removed from total isolation, however, they usually go into a state of emotional shock characterized by autistic self clutching and rocking. One monkey, isolated for 3 months, refused to eat after being released and died 5 days later. Harlow wrote the autopsy report attributed his death to emotional anorexia. Oh, that poor
Poor,
baby.
poor baby. Now, if history does have a human evolution has taught us anything, is that the most humane trait is our ability to adapt. Though survival on its own planet has certainly gotten easier over time, these 9 stories of feral children remind us of our roots and the perils of life in the wild. Defined as a child who has lived in isolation from human contact from an early age, a feral child often struggles to learn the human language and behavior once they make the contact with people again. Now, while some feral children are able to make the progress, others struggle to even form a complete sentence. The phenomenon of feral
Da,
children,
do, 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 do.
is exceptionally rare, as they have now seen over 100 known cases throughout human history. Some of these stories show how malleable as we are as a species, while others reveal how vital human contact truly in our formative years. All of these cases, however, explore the resilience of humankind in the face of abandonment and being forced to fend for oneself. Look at Utsar Pradesh. He was raised by wolves in India. Oh, I'm sorry. Dina Shachar was the gentleman. He spent the first few years of his life thinking he was a wolf. It is believed he never learned how to interact with human beings until hunters found him in 1867 and took him to an orphanage. Thus, he spent years attempting to adapt to human behavior, which may have inspired Roger Kipling's The Jungle Book. But Sasia's story is no fairy tale. The hunters had first encountered Sasia at a wolf's den, where they were shocked to see a 6-year-old boy living among the pack. They decided it wasn't safe for the child to be out in the jungle. So they decided to transport him to civilization.
As Shelley points out, the humans are so much worse than the animals that raise these kids.
Sometimes.
Um, and it's interesting how this is, inspired by the Jungle Book. A lot of times when we hear these stories, we think of like, oh, this had to have been a movie or, something, a fiction that was written, a book or whatever. But it's
Hmm.
really, interesting how this is actually history and these things really did happen, even though they were few and far between.
Right.
There has been some debate on whether this is, if these children were really feral or if, if it was a show or that was put on or kind of like a con. So that's where kind of like the debate comes in on it. However, once the hunters realized early on that they would have difficulty communicating with Sunny Chair, as he behaved much like a wolf. He would walk on all fours and only speak in wolf like grunts and howls. Ultimately, the hunters smoked the pack out of the cave and killed. Oh man. Um, they took the child back with them. Um, Taken to Sikandra Mission Orphanage in the city of Agra, Sanchier was welcomed by the missionaries there. They gave him a name and observed his animal like behavior. Even before, I'm sorry, even though he was no longer with the animals, he continued to walk on all fours and howl like a wolf. Sanicher would only accept raw meat as food and sometimes even chewed on the bones to sharpen his teeth, which was a skill he learned out in the wild. Before long, he became better known as the Wolf Boy. Though missionaries attempted to teach him sign language by pointing, it was soon clear that it would be a lost cause. After all, since wolves have no fingers, they aren't able to point at anything at all. So Sanicher likely had no idea what the missionaries were doing when they pointed their fingers.
Hmm. Pointing with their fingers. That's kind of an interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There,
That said,
boy. There,
yeah.
man.
And that said, Sanchir was able to make some progress while in the orphanage. He learned how to walk upright, put on his own clothes, and eat from a plate, although he sniffed his food before eating it. Perhaps the most human trait that he picked up, nasty habit by the way, was smoking cigarettes. Despite all the strides he made, Sun Xier never learned a human language or fully adjusted to life among other people and villages. He ultimately died of tuberculosis in 1895 when he was just 35 years old.
Mm.
Now, when it comes to feral children found in America, perhaps none of them has suffered much cruelty as Jeannie Wiley. Born in 1957 near Los Angeles, she endured horrific abuse from the hands of her father, Clark. For 13 years, Clark kept Jeannie isolated in a room with more akin to a prison cell. Most of the time, Jeannie was kept strapped to a toddler toilet, and sometimes she even was placed in an actual cage. When Clark wasn't burying her with a plank of wood, he was growing her like a rabid dog.
Sounds like he had some issues himself.
Yes.
Oh, goodness. Most crucially, Jeannie had almost no interaction with anyone else but her immediate family during those formative years, and she was never allowed outside. Until her mother, Irene, escaped with her in 1970. Since Irene was nearly blind, she would later she would later claim that her disability prevented her from helping Jeannie while her daughter was going through all of this. Shortly after fleeing the home, Irene accidentally walked into a Los Angeles social service office instead of an office that offered aid to the blind. Welfare workers took one look at Jeannie and immediately knew that there was help in need. At first, they thought she might simply be autistic, but then they learned the grim truth about the feral child. Cases of abuse were opened against both Jeannie's parents, but Irene was able to convince authorities to drop a case against her, claiming she was also a victim. As for Clark, he ended his life instead of facing trial, leaving behind a note that read, "The world will never understand." Yeah, I think he had some issues himself.
Yes.
It's such a tragedy.
Right. What the National Institute of Mental Health justly wanted to understand, however, was how extreme isolation in a person's formative years shaped their lives. And a group of scientists were highly interested in finding out what part of the language had been a person's development and vice versa. They saw Jeannie as a blank slate, an opportunity for research. So from 1971 to 1975, Jeannie was subjected to scientific experimentations at the behest of the researchers. During this time, experts made some discoveries. For example, Jeannie disproved the theory that one could not learn a language after puberty. Puberty, not puberty.
Well,
Though
it
she
is pretty
struggled,
poo poo.
yes, though she did struggle with grammar. However, many scientists felt the experimentation was too rigorous to be ethical. Many of the scientists were also accused of having a conflict of interest, as she lived with them during the stay during the study. In 1979, her mother filed a lawsuit against the hospital and many of the scientists who had studied Jeannie, claiming they exploited her for prestige and profit. The suit was settled in 1984, and Jeannie would cease to all contact with researchers.
Um, Though Janie lived with her mother for a brief period, she was eventually placed in foster homes, some of which were not very kind either. These experiences caused her to regress, and she never recovered from the trauma, even when she was removed from the homes and reunited with her mother. While it is reported that she's still alive today and assisted living in Los Angeles, the 64-year-old is believed to be a mere shell of a person. So, yeah, just to let you all know, we don't condone this type of behavior. This is, some of the darkest.
Worse stuff that humans can do.
Yes, agreed. Now we go on to discovered naked and alone in the German wilderness in 1725. Peter, the wild boy, was about 11 years old when he was rescued. It's believed that he was abandoned by his parents, who likely couldn't afford to raise him. And after he was discovered, everyone called him Peter, but no one actually knew if that was his real name. Like many feral people left to fend for themselves, he was unable to talk, and he also hated wearing clothes. The following year, when Peter was about 12, he was transported to London, where he would become the human pet of King George I. Oh my goodness. There, the wild boy ran around on all fours and picked the pockets of courtiers in the
Gee,
Kensington
you're
Palace.
walking right over my lines.
Oh, I apologize.
Uh huh.
Continue. I'm sorry. I'm
Yes.
just so lost into all of this, and it's like you've never done it
Hmm.
to me before. But go for it. Tell us more about Peter.
Yeah, Peter. It was widely believed that Peter had been raised by wolves or bears, as behavior made it clear he now spends time with people. In this age of enlightenment, it made Peter's condition all the more fascinating to English high society. and they questioned what it meant to be human. Meanwhile, many in the palace grew tired of Peter's antics, especially his poor table manners and his insistence on sleeping on the floor. Eventually, the court paid for Peter's retirement at a farm in Herefordshire. He spent the rest of his life surrounded by kind farmers, but was forced to wear a collar that read, Peter the Wild Man of Hanover. Whoever will bring him to Mr. Fem at Bethenstrand shall be paid for their trouble.
Oh, goodness. Peter died in 1785 and was buried in the cemetery of St. Mary's at North Church. Since then, experts have used Peter's portraits and hypothesized that he had suffered from Pitt Hopkins syndrome, which is a rare genetic condition that causes distinctive facial features as well as an intellectual disability. Tragically, that may explain why his parents abandoned him. In 2011, the condition that afflicted Peter, the wild boy, was suspected to be the chromosomal disorder, Pitt Hopkins syndrome, a condition only identified in 1978, which was nearly 200 years after Peter's death. Various physical attributes of Peter's, which are evident in the Kensington Palace portrait, have been matched to this condition, such as his curvy cupid bow lips, his short stature, his coarse curly hair, drooping eyelids, and thick lips. An item on the BBC Radio 4 program, Witness History broadcast in March of 2011, examined the history of Peter the Wild Boy, tracing his life in Northchurch and later in Berkhamsted, where the leather and brass collar designed to identify Peter in case he should wander away from the village and inscribed Peter the Wild Man is preserved at Berkhamsted School. Ugh, that's a tongue twister.
Berkhamsted School.
Yes.
Now we go up, move up to about May 26, 1828, and go to Nuremberg, Germany, where residents encountered a 16-year-old boy in bedraggled clothing passing through a public square. The mysterious teenager appeared to be unable to read, write, or recall anything about his life except for his name was Caspar Hauer. Now people do want to know all about Caspar Hauer. Hauer carried two letters in an envelope that initially seemed to clarify a few things. First letter addressed the captain of a local cavalry and asked him to place the boy in his regiment. The second was dated 1812 and supposedly written by the boy's mother. It had explained that the boy's father had died and it reiterated that Hauser must join the military. When authorities took Hauser into custody, they found him repulsed by all food and drink save for bread and water. Strangely, he also walked as though he only had just learned how to, and in the rare instance that he spoke, he mainly mumbled about horses. Made a ward of the city, Hauser was eventually put into custody of a British nobleman named Lord Stanhope. Incredibly, just weeks after his rescue, Hauser apparently learned how to read and write. He would later claim that he had been just raised in a small room without light until an unknown man guided him to the outskirts of Nuremberg. Right.
Shelley says in many cultures, babies that were born less than perfect were
Were
left out
abandoned.
to die.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if this is the case with some of these kids. I definitely agree. I do know also that a lot of times they were locked away in a room
Mm-hmm.
and hidden from society. So yeah, it's very sad what we did to people who were disabled or as she pointed out, less than perfect in our past. It's mankind. Gotta love it.
Yes.
Now, going back to Hauser, observed by the poet and professor George Friedrich Dahmer, Hauser began to reveal more shocking details about his upbringing. He explained that he had been brought up in a prison during his early years, but then also mentioned a detailed dream that involved him living in a castle. So it seems like he was a man of tall tales.
Yes.
Some residents who believed that Hauser was a true feral person and savant speculated that he may have actually been a lost prince, or perhaps even the son of Stephanie de Beauharnais. Always have trouble with French. Meanwhile, others simply thought that he was a fraud who was after fame and fortune. Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards that.
Yeah.
However, to this day, Hauser's true identity remains unknown. But one thing that is known is that he suffered a painful death. In his final years, there were many alleged attempts on his life by strange men, culminating in a fatal stabbing in 1833. However, some insisted that he had stabbed himself just for attention, only to accidentally wound himself far more gravely than he had intended. While it is clear that Hauser enjoyed attention from others and almost certainly exaggerated his story, you think?
Hmm.
Many still debate whether he was a talented con artist or a true feral person with a severe mental illness. Illness? No, I'm sorry, illness.
He had a severe mental illness because I have cute sense of airing.
About 200 years later, we still don't have the full answers and likely never will. I vote con artist.
That's what I'm saying. Right.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and go back just a little bit to 1731 to the village of Songy, France. Villagers spotted a young girl dressed in animals' rags stealing apples from an orchard. It was difficult for the villagers to tell how old she is, and her age was estimated to be anywhere from 10 to 18 years old.
That's a pretty wide range.
Yeah. When the villagers did send a bulldog her way, she killed it with one fatal blow and escaped in the woods in mere moments.
Wow.
Yeah, the
That's
villagers
pretty
eventually,
strong.
yeah, the villagers eventually captured her and soon realized she didn't speak any formal language. Instead, she communicated much more like an animal, often howling.
What's that?
Risky thinks I'm communicating with him. He's like, "What's up?"
I made the dog growl.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Getting those animals worked up over there.
Hmm.
Did you lose your place?
No, I was just waiting till I think because she was hospitalized in Chalons. She was baptized as Marie Angelique Menet Leblanc. With that, doctors and other experts immediately moved towards civilizing her. The feral children origins was only revealed in 1755 when biographer Marie Catherine Omasse Hiquet published her American account of a savage girl in collaboration with Leblanc, a Native American girl. Leblanc had allegedly been painted black and sold as a slave in Wisconsin at the age of 7. Sold to a French woman, Leblanc was put on a French-bound ship.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um. So they took this poor girl
Mm-hmm.
and painted her
Right.
and then sold her into slavery when she was 7.
Uh-huh.
I mean, couldn't people tell that she wasn't? I don't know.
Yeah,
It
I
just
don't
seems
know.
like. Many believe that the boat in question. Sorry, I don't know if you heard that loud car going by. They drive like
That's all right.
crazy here. Many believe that the boat in question was shipwrecked and LeBlanc was washed ashore with another girl. From there, they both became feral people and slept in the wilderness, surviving on raw squirrel, foxes, and rabbits. At some point, the pair separated and LeBlanc was eventually captured. Despite her traumatic start to life, LeBlanc would eventually regain her health while in the hospital. Even more incredible, she soon learned to speak French under the tutelage of several patient teachers, apparently regaining linguistic abilities that had been lost for quite some time. She was gawked at by intellectuals and high society people in France as a former savage, quote unquote, who had become refined. Mingling with nobility, Leblanc was given a generous allowance by a duke and permitted to explore Europe. For a brief period of time, she even tried her hand at becoming a nun.
While the Duke's death in 1752 left Leblanc without financial resources, she soon was able to secure other patronages thanks to her numerous wealthy connections. By the time she died at the age of 63 in 1775, she was notably wealthy herself. It was said she preferred to wear silk and velvet clothing, and yet she still maintained a certain wildness in her appearance.
How did they know she was 63 when she died? When they couldn't figure out her age when she was found, they said she was either between the ages of 10 and 18. So, how do they know her exact age when she died?
Because they just decided to say, "Oh, she was 63 when she died." Maybe when she learned how to talk, she's like, "Ah, I was born in 1904, and I'm kind of reverse type of thing."
Okay, so she was born in 1904, but she was found in 1752.
Exactly. She stepped through that hidden portal through time.
That explains a lot.
Yeah. Howard and I were just like this. I was the one over here.
Okay.
In 1994, a feral child was discovered living among the wild dogs in the village of Nova Blaskovich, Nova Blakovovchenitska in Ukraine. Local police had never dealt with feral humans before, and they had to use food in order to distract the hounds while they lured the young girl away from her canine family. I'll say family instead of friends. The 8
Mhm.
year old was eventually identified as Oksana Malaysia, a local girl whose alcoholic parents had abandoned her outside in the cold for 5 years earlier.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, instinctively, Malaya had crawled into a dog kennel to seek warm shelter and spent the next 5 years with its inhabitants. Sustained by whatever scraps or leftovers the canines were fed, Malaya have occasionally entered her old house for additional food. But undoubtedly, she lived a large, feral life outdoors until the police were called.
That's really interesting that she was able to survive because it gets really cold in the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know they have some very, very harsh winters and below zero. So for her to be able to live through that by, these dogs keeping her warm, that's just, really amazing that that happened. Um, but as a ward of the state, Malaya was admitted to several psychiatric institutes and group homes. For a while, she was unable to speak and continued to walk on all fours. But Malaya eventually learned how to talk again thanks to the minimal language she already knew from her early years. Um, Shelley says the story took a different turn. I'm
Hmm.
thinking she means the one you from before about
Oh,
the young girl in France.
yes. I'm sorry. It was
We had to
mild.
try to lighten it up a little. It was
Yes,
getting a little too sad.
it's a
So
little dark, and we have
we
to.
just wanted to lighten it up just a little bit. But back to Malaya. At an orphanage school, she was successfully taught a more wide ranging vocabulary. She also learned how to walk upright again and to communicate like other human beings, at least for the most part. Though Malaya is now in her late 30s, she still requires supervision and adult care. I'm sorry, at an adult care facility and will sorry, tongue words. She will likely never be fully independent. She is also said to speak in a flat, emotionless tone, almost as if she's being ordered to talk. But her bark remains as strong as ever. And whenever she is given an object, her very first instinct is to hide it, just like a dog does with a bone. I wouldn't want to ask about her bite then.
No, because most feral humans have been abandoned against their will. Ivan Milikoskov, found living in the streets preamble to his life at home. He had a difficult childhood in the care of an alcoholic grandfather who commonly left the boy on his own for days on end. At the age of 3 or 4, the young boy left his home to find refuge with the stray dogs in the mid 1990s. Russians and Ukrainians, my gosh. The homeless boy and his companions beg for food from local bakeries in town near Moscow. In the cold of night, Meshkov curled up with a pack of dogs in order to fall asleep. He named the dogs Jessie, Groga, Masha, and Seva, and spent about 2 years with them. The hounds had grown to accept Meshkov as one of their own and shared whatever scraps they found on the street with him. Meshkova returned the favor, but then the police rescued him in 1998. This took several tries, as the protective dogs wouldn't allow anyone near Mishkova at first. By the time Mishkova was saved, he was about 5 or 6 years old and clear of the need of help. Still, he was reluctant to leave the dogs that they had bonded with. I love my dogs, and they loved me, Mishka said. They gave me a lick on the face that the dog cannot give kisses.
Mm.
Mischoff soon placed into an orphanage near Moscow. His loyal canine family never forgot him, however, and appeared at the institution's gates to retrieve him. Unfortunately, local officials decided to kill the dogs, which Mischoff describes as his only family. Come on, people.
Why did they kill the dogs? Why didn't they just let him keep them?
Yeah,
I mean, come on. This is. Now, I understand that if it wasn't for the dogs, I would have survived in the streets, said Mushukov. But I am also grateful to the policeman who took me from the pack, and of course to my foster mom who raised me. Mushkov's fortunes certainly changed when Tatiana Babanina took
Babanina.
Babanina took him in. The loving foster mother not only helped him recover from his traumatizing youth, but also ensured that he excelled academically. After graduating from Kronstadt Naval Cadet School, he found a full time factory job. Unlike many other Pharaoh people, his story has been mostly a happy ending, except for his poor puppies. Sorry.
Yes, we won't talk about that.
No, we won't. Many feral children on this list had traumatizing youths, and Marina Chapman is no exception. According to Chapman, she was kidnapped at the age of 4, only to be abandoned in the jungles of Colombia in the 1950s. She remembers being left for dead, only to encounter a group of monkeys that cautiously allowed her to join their family.
Monkeys. As chronicled
Monkeys.
in her autobiography, The Girl with No Name, she began to follow the roaming family of primates around, wordlessly leading her to fruits and nuts. They ultimately accepted her as one of them. Ultimately, however, she learned some of the tougher laws of the jungle. They don't give you anything, said Chapman. You just have to wait until something drops, and then you have move quickly because if you don't want, another monkey will take it away. Yeah. It's worth noting
Mhm.
that her story has been difficult to prove or disprove, with some naysayers saying she's making the whole thing up. But, as Chapman tells it, she lived with the monkeys for about 5 years. At the age of 9, she finally garnered the courage and curiosity to approach people in the jungle, only to be captured and forced into sexual slavery in a nearby town. While she was eventually able to escape and soon found herself on the streets with limited vocabulary.
Oh my goodness. She said, I quickly learned with children to speak when I came to the city, but with adults, I found them difficult to understand. With monkeys, you know where you stand with them, but with humans, it's complicated. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can definitely agree with
totally
that.
agree.
Chapman had no problem stealthily finding food and nimbly evading onlookers, but she was tired of merely surviving, so she accepted a job as a household servant in an attempt to properly support herself. However, when she overheard her employer discussing a murder, she realized that she was working for ruthless gangsters and was forced to escape yet again. Yeah, I can believe that in Colombia. There's some
Hmm.
stuff that goes down there that's not very kind. While her book led several critics to try and debunk her story, they have yet to do so. Even her publisher ordered Chapman to be evaluated for false memory syndrome, which she didn't display. Amazingly, she is now a happy grandmother living in the United Kingdom today, though she mostly lives in a relatively normal life now. She did teach her children how to climb trees early on and make monkey noises at the breakfast table.
Still, Chapman doesn't believe her story is that unusual. Despite the jaw dropping details, I was really surprised because, believe me, I spent some time with some children on the streets, and they had so many stories to tell that I don't think mine was anything special, she said. Unlike many other feral children, Marcos Rodriguez Banjoya ended up in the wild by mistake. His father had sold him to the farmer when he was just 6 or 7 years old. Banjoya was then instructed to help an aging goat herd in the Sierra Morena mountains of Spain. Eventually, the man who Pajoro was working for died and was forced to make the decision on what to do next. Since he had grown up in an abusive home, he did want to return to his family. So he chose to stay in the mountains by himself. Surviving on his own, the feral person spent the next 12 years of his life surrounded by wolves and other animals like goats, bears, and snakes. Remarkably, he found natural shelter inside the caves, where the wolves offered him their food. But the wolves weren't the only ones helping him out.
Sorry, I'll be just a moment and continue on.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and talk about Bedoya says these
Yes,
animals
I
guided him.
apologize for that. Mercy had the TV on. I was trying to get him to put headphones on, but he decided to turn it off.
Okay.
But as you were saying, the animals guided him to what as to what to eat. Whatever they ate, he ate. The wild boars ate tubers buried under the soil. They found them because they smelled them. When they were digging the soil looking for them, I threw a stone at them. Then I would steal the tubers. Oh, that's just mean.
Yeah.
Luckily, the goat herd had taught Pantoja how to hunt rabbits and build traps out of sticks and leaves before he died. This turned out to be as invaluable as he didn't always have other animals around to teach him to go after food. But when he did, Pantoja eventually learned how to communicate with the creatures by using growls and other sounds instead of words. But in 1965, Pantoja was found by the Guardia Civil, who forcibly took him into the village of Fuencaliente. There, he was briefly reunited with his father, who simply asked him what happened to the jacket he had on when he left. Okay, so his dad was more concerned about the jacket than finding his
Yes.
son. Meanwhile, Pantoja was forced to learn how to communicate like a human again, and so he decided to tell his story to anyone who would listen, turning him into a local legend of the area. Eventually, he took a Spanish anthropologist.
Anthropologist.
Yes, thank you. Um, Eventually, a Spanish anthropologist named Gabriel Janner Manila.
No, 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 no. It's Spanish.
Oh, so it's Janer.
Gabriel
Gabriel Janer Manila
Manila. Yes.
took interest in his history. I am sorry.
Manuela wrote
Not Manuela, Manila.
Manila wrote a thesis on the case, published a novel about Panola's life, and filmed him 10 years after he had just returned from the wild. Though Manila was initially skeptical of Padille's story, he soon found it remained consistent for years. In addition, locals who had made interactive with Padilla shortly after he was found corroborated many of his claims. Despite his unusual start of life, Panora eventually assimilated himself in human society again. Under the tutelage of nuns who taught him manners and society customs, he learned how to live on his own in Granat, Spain. That said, Panoro had mixed feeling about his return to civilization, as he often felt disappointed by many humans in his life. And even though now in his 70s, he sometimes wishes that he can return to the wild. Now, let's talk about the legend of the green children of Whirl Pit. They start during the reign of King Stephen in a rather tumultuous time in English history called the Anarchy in the mid 12th century.
Yes, this will definitely be a little more lightened than some of the other stories.
Hmm.
But Woolpit, or in Old English, Wolfpit, is an ancient village in Suffolk named after, as one might gather from its name, an old pit of catching wolves. These pits, designed to and ensnare dangerous wolves, were likely at least twice as tall as children and a couple of hundred square feet in the area. Next to the wolf pit, around 1150, a group of villagers came across two young children who had green skin, apparently speaking gibberish and acting nervously. The children, found to be brother and sister, were of generally normal appearance except for the color of their skin, which was green, and they spoke in an unknown language. According to the writings at the time by Ralph of Coggeshall, the children were subsequently taken to the nearby home of Sir Richard de Calne, where he offered them food, but they repeatedly refused to eat. This continued for some days until the children came across some green beans in Richard de Calne's garden, which they ate straight out of the ground. Eventually, they learned to eat other foods and lost their green color. But the boy was sickly and continued to suffer. He could not adapt to the environment and soon became ill, dying. The girl adjusted to her new life, and after she learned to speak English, the girl explained that she and her brother had come from a land where the sun never shone and the light was like twilight. The sun does not rise up on our countrymen, and our land is little cheered by its beams. We are contented with we are contented with that twilight, which among you precedes the sunrise or follows the sunset. Moreover, a certain luminous country is seen, not far distant from ours, and divided by a very considerable river. So my thought is that these kids are green because all they ate were green vegetables.
That might have been
So the what do you call it? Not chloroform, but
chlorophyll.
chlorophyll. They had a lot of chlorophyll in their system because it says that when they started eating regular food, that green tint went away. So I'm thinking they were just some feral kids who lived off of green vegetables.
Right. The children were unable to account for when their arrival in Wolf Pit. They had been herding their father's cattle when they heard a loud noise. It was like the sounds of bells of St. Edmund's Abbey, and suddenly found themselves by the wolf pit where they were found. Ralph says they were being became lost when they followed the cattle into a cave, after being guided by the sound of bells, and eventually emerged into our land. The girl, who was employed at many years as a servant in Richard de Caulnier's household, was she considered to be a very wanton and impudent. She eventually married a man from King's Lynn, about 45 miles from Woolpit, where she was still living. Based on her research into Richard de Caulnier's family history, it is concluded that the girl was given the name Agnes, and she married a royal official named Richard Barry. According to one report, the pair had at least one child. If the story is based on actual events, there are a few plausible explanations for the green tint. One theory is that the children had arsenic poisoning. The story goes that their caretaker, an Earl of Norfolk, left them to die in the forest near the Norfolk-Suffolk border. Another more likely and less depressing culprit is chloriosis, a type of iron deficiency spawned by malnutrition that leads to a greenish complexion. So that kind of sounds really interesting.
Yes. And then another and perhaps most likely theory postulates that they were children of Flemish immigrants who were persecuted and killed, possibly in the battle at Forum in 1173. Forum St. Martin was a nearby village separated from Woolpit by a river just a few miles from the Bury St. Edmunds, where loud bells often chimed. It's possible that the children had been orphaned, suffered a poor diet while lost on their own, and eventually made their way to Woolpit from Forham, St. Martin, by following the clanging bells. Historian Charles Oman noted that one element of the children's account, the entry into a different reality by way of a cave, seems to have been quite popular. Gerard of Wells, the medieval historian, tells a similar story of a boy who was a truant from school who encountered two pygmies who led him through an underground passage into a beautiful land with fields and rivers, but not lit by the full light of the sun. Your underground people you're always talking about.
Mm-hmm. Firmly
Gervais,
believe.
you firmly believe in the people that live underground?
Yep.
Well, we do have many caverns and cave systems that have never been discovered or
Right.
even, ventured through. So who knows? Gervais of Tilbury, whom Ralph of Coxshall is known to have been acquainted, also wrote of a Derbyshire swineherder who looked for a pig in a cave but found a world where the seasons were the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess basically what they're saying is that these caves lead to alternate dimensions or
Possibly.
different like portals or wormholes to other lands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how much I buy into that, but I go for the either the malnutrition or eating too many green vegetables. I mean, you eat too
Or
many
iron
carrots, you
based.
turn orange.
Yeah.
So continue.
Continue. Now, from investigating divorce behind the Woolpit children is that they were hailed from European background and had a reverence for the Christian church and subside through farming livestock. They knew about tending to cattle that they likely had been taught to their father. Regardless of their strange clothes and language they spoke, historians believe that they may have been Flemish immigrants escaping the persecution of King Henry II. Dressed in strange Flemish clothes and speaking another language, they will appear to be strange to the very English speaking villages of Woolpit. The eating of beans has also attracted a lot of folklorists. It is to be noticed, too, that the ritual food of children were beans, the food of the dead, of course. There are others who don't buy this explanation and say they're either travelers from a parallel dimension of time or came from a mysterious underground world that is not known to mankind yet. Robert Burton suggested in the 1621 book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, that the green children fell from heaven, leading others to speculate that the children may only have been extraterrestrials. They're aliens, man! Trust me!
Are they extraterrestrials or are they intraterrestrials?
They
That's the
might
question.
question, yes,
Are they from out there or from down there?
yes.
In 1996, an article published in the magazine Analog, astronomer Duncan Lunan hypothesized that the children were accidentally transported to Woolpit from their home planet, which may be trapped in synchronous orbit around its sun, presenting the conditions for life only in a narrow twilight zone between a fiercely hot surface and a frozen dark side. The story of the Green Children has endured for over 8 centuries since the first recorded accounts, while the real facts behind the true story may never be known. It has been provided through inspiration for numerous poems, novels, operas, and plays around the world, and continues to capture the imagination of many curious minds. So, now we ask you, the viewer or listener, what are your thoughts on the feral children? What are your thoughts on the green children? Do you think that they were aliens from another dimension or just malnourished children? Leave us a comment, and if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're listening to a replay on your favorite podcast, we ask that you rate us and leave a review. And what kind of reviews do we like?
We like a one, we like a two, we like a three, like a four, we like a 5 stars there on the Apple. Apple.
We
Tell
do
us,
like,
Jill, tell us how good we're doing or bad we're doing.
yes, we definitely like 5 stars, but we'll take what you can give us. Also, make sure you leave a review. We do read reviews on air, so it's a good way to get a shout out. Also, if you have any comments or questions, you can also email us at info@skepticpsychic.com. If you have anything that you would like to share as far as stories you would like us to read on air or any ideas for the show, such as different topics you would like to hear us cover, you can email us there as well. Again, that's info@skepticpsychic.com, and you can find that on our website. And next week, we will be talking about strange occurrences. So that's going to be an interesting one. What is your
Hmm.
favorite strange occurrence?
I would say, don't know. What is yours?
I'm definitely fond of the similarities between Lincoln and Kennedy.
Hmm.
That is something that I think that's really interesting, a very strange coincidence. But we will be discussing those next week. So make sure you mark your calendars and join us on Sunday at 8:30 Central. That would be 7:30 Mountain, 6:30 Pacific, and 9:30 Eastern.
Hmm.
And anything else you want to share this week before we end this show?
That we always want to say unpleasant nightmares.
Yes. And I do want to point out We did get a message from Shelley, our wonderful researcher, and we appreciate all the work she did on this episode. She says, I wonder if they wore the clothing that they wore was dyed green and if that could have stained their skin.
Maybe.
That is an interesting hypothesis. I hadn't thought about that one. Um, but
Oh,
also,
been living in a cave, man.
they were just covered in moss and mildew. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wanted also to say how like our generation was also known as the feral generation, because we had the latchkey kids and the going out and being out until the lights came on. Our parents rarely knew where we were. So people say that we were feral. Do you agree with that statement? Would you say you were a feral child growing up?
I was a real wild child.
You were a real wild child.
Oh yeah.
Ah,
Just
okay.
Iggy Pop sang my national anthem.
Ah. Mercy agrees back here. He's going woohoo. So
Yep.
yeah. Um, but again, if you think that the Generation X was, definitely a feral generation, you can also, leave a comment on that and share what your experience was growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And if you feel like you were definitely a real wild child, as Richard has pointed out. And with that, I say sweet dreams, everybody. Have a great night.
And unpleasant nightmares.
Good night, everyone. Have a
Good
good
night.
one.
You too. Good night.